Talk Show. Recorded live.
Welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror, movies, and awesomeness. Our usual host, Jason Henderson, has been carried off by giant monsters. So in his honor this week, we're kicking off our look at giant monsters. And of course, with Godzilla coming out this weekend, what better way to start that than with the original 1954 Godzilla, also known as Gojira. Bear in mind that if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have, so warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host for the week, Julia Guzman. With me from Austin is Drew Edwards, writer of the long-running comic Halloween Man, now from Monsterverse Comics, and a contributing writer to Rockabilly Online and Monsterverse's Tales from the Grave. Say hello, Drew.
Hello.
Also in Austin is Tony Salvaggio, co-writer of the Victorian mech comic Clockworks from Humanoids and Psycom, the manga from Right Stuff, and Tokyo Pop, and lead singer of the band Deserts of Mars. Say hi, Tony.
Howdy.
And we are thrilled to have with us this week a very special guest, also in Austin, Matt Frank, artist for the Godzilla Rulers of Earth comic series from IDW, as well as the Colossal Kaiju Combat video game from Flintstones Games. Welcome, Matt.
That would be me. Hello.
Okay, so according to Wikipedia, Godzilla, a.k.a. Gojira, is a 1954 Japanese science fiction kaiju giant monster movie produced by Toho, directed by Ishiro Honda, and featuring special effects by Eiji Tsuburaya. I'm sure I totally slaughtered that.
No, you got that really close.
The plot tells the story of Godzilla, a giant monster mutated by nuclear radiation who ravages Japan and brings back the horrors of World War II's nuclear devastation to the very nation that experienced it firsthand. It was the first of many kaiju films released in Japan, paving the way and setting the standard for future kaiju films, many of which feature Godzilla. So why don't we get some first thoughts and impressions? Let's start with Tony, please.
Wow. Yeah, this series is really in my wheelhouse. Like, monster movies, kaiju movies in particular, I just knew them as giant monster movies. I started watching when I was 3 or 4, and, for whatever reason, they didn't really show as many of the black and white movies. They didn't show this one in that regular kind of monster movie rotation, monster theater rotation, but I saw a lot of other Godzilla movies and Gamera movies and stuff. And so this whole series, I'm really stoked. But this one in particular is a really, really, is the godfather of all that, and also has a really, really different feel. And I'm going to put one of my endorsements already, like in the front. If you don't have the Criterion Godzilla Gojira, like, Blu-ray, you need that right now. Like, it's really amazing. Like, it looks fantastic. It's got great commentary. The extras are great. It's got the Raymond Burr version of the film. It's amazing. So you need that. But if you don't have it, we're here to talk about that. So yeah, if you can't tell, I'm super stoked. So we'll get into that.
Thank you, Drew. What do you think?
Well, I like most people, the version of this that I grew up with is the Raymond Burr version. I really like that version, but I think the version that we're going to mostly be talking about tonight, the Japanese version, is a superior film in every way, shape, or form. I love the sort of haunting documentary-like quality to it. And I love I really love the miniature work and the special effects here. I think that, they hold up pretty well. I know there'll probably be people who disagree with me on that. I'm not as big of a Japanese monster movie fan as Tony or Frank, but I did grow up with these movies. I watched them. The guy, Al Lewis, the guy that played Grandpa Munster, had a horror host show that he would run Toho monster movies on it. I loved Godzilla 1985 as a kid. In fact, I still have an action figure from Godzilla 1985 that I've owned ever since I was a kid. And my twin brother, who is unfortunately no longer with us, was a giant Godzilla fan. So, when I think about him a lot, I think about these movies in particular. So I am also excited to dig into this particular genre. So awesome.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And Matt, what are your first thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, when it comes to the original Godzilla, it was actually a while before I got to that. I mean, I think I'm probably the youngest in the crew here, so unfortunately I didn't get to grow up watching the afternoon movie with horror hosts or anything. Closest thing I got was what's the name, Joe Bob on TNT.
Joe Bob,
right.
Yeah.
I caught a couple of those. Like he did Valley of Guanji a couple of times, and I was just like, this is awesome. But yeah,
they talk about them all the time.
Yeah, exactly. But then, mostly my exposure to Godzilla came from going to Blockbuster as a kid. My parents would, take me there, and I was slowly kind of picking my way through the Godzilla lexicon. I didn't know how many movies there were. I just remembered, for example, my parents would be at different Blockbusters or something, or at a different video rentals place, and they would call, my dad would call my mom and say, hey, tell Matt that there's something called the Son of Godzilla, and then I'd just lose my little damn monkey mind. But I really grew up on the hero version of Godzilla. I grew up with Godzilla versus Megalon and Godzilla versus the Sea Monster, where Godzilla was, he maybe wasn't always a straight up superhero, but he was a benevolent force, and he was the lesser of two evils. And when it came to one day, I found Godzilla King of the Monsters, and I must have just put two and two together, or I remember reading in some old dinosaur magazine that this was the first Godzilla, and I watched it, and even the Raymond Burr version really kind of struck me as a child, and I remember it kind of being a weird association because I saw both the original King Kong and the original Godzilla very close to each other, and I remember just kind of being bummed out after the whole ordeal because even, like I said, even the Raymond Burr version of Godzilla is still pretty somber, and that opening sequence with this is Tokyo is really it's still pretty powerful stuff, and kind of puts you in the mood, and and then it wasn't until later I was able to kind of get my hands on the original version, of course directed by Yoshiro Honda, and it really is. I threw it on last night, and I actually listened to the Tony mentioned earlier, I believe, the Criterion release is the one that most people are probably familiar with right now, with a commentary by David Callett, who is a great commentary track. But I threw on the Classic Media version last night, which has a commentary track by Steve Reifel and Ed Gadziczeski, and that's also just filled with information, and it was just really. In addition to that, I'm rambling, but in addition to that, I also got to see it on the big screen recently during South by Southwest with a little Q&A by Gareth Edwards afterwards. So, director of the new Godzilla. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, that is great. Well, thank you
Yeah,
so
that's
much.
one of the only events that I wish I was like, oh, I hate that I'm missing this. There wasn't a lot at South by, but that one was really, I was really unhappy.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah. Well,
well, for my purposes, I had never seen this original 1954 version, I don't think, and but I've certainly seen the clips and the little bits and pieces. So I mean, I had an impression of what it was going to be like, and but it's really an amazing work given the age. I mean, like the effect. It just, I mean, there's a lot of things that are so cheese-tastic about it, but when you consider the age, it's really not. I mean, but just nowadays, of course, with the effects that we have now, I mean, the way that they toss these little toy cars and ships and things around, that seems a little silly. But gosh, the monster still is impressive, and the devastation of the city and the people. The acting is really great. It's like you really get the impression that these people are terrified. There's so many things incorporated into the movie that. They had the actual troops are real Japanese Defense Force troops because they were on maneuvers. So it's things like that just add this sense of just of real terror to it. And So I actually really enjoyed it. Was impressed with it, and I think it is kind of scary. I mean, it's hard to watch because of course it's subtitled, and so you can't look. I'm kind of used to when I'm doing these. Watching these movies, taking notes and looking down and looking stuff up on IMDb and whatever. And it's like every time you look away, you miss something because you don't have to get to the subtitles. So that was hard to adjust to. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. So I'm glad that we were doing it, and certainly a classic for sure. So let's go ahead and get it started off. I want to talk about it in the context of, and I don't know who wants to start, but in the context of the history that we're talking. I mean, this is 1954. We've just come out of World War II, and of course, Japan has been hit by these two enormous atomic bombs in in the country, and it's obviously this is coming out of that, and not only in terms of the actual movie, where they're saying like, oh well, the atomic radiation has created this creature or brought back to life this kind of dinosaur creature that lives in the deep sea and has made it so much bigger and so much more powerful, but also the metaphor of Godzilla as terms of the war and the atomic bombs and all that. So I'd like to know just kind of what you guys know about that topic.
Yeah, I think that also to preface it is, when we look at it, it is of a time, right? The effects are what they are. Also from a movie industry where, in general, Japan kind of like with CG, for example, they're kind of behind a little bit, stuff like that. So they didn't have the same kind of cinema. But then they all of a sudden did. Like, this is impressive to people. I mean, it's still impressive for what they got done. And also in context, there wasn't a giant monster like thing like this until now. Until like this, we've seen all this stuff, and we're like, oh, and we've seen Godzilla as the hero, which is also, when Matt was talking, like, I grew up with that too. I mean, it's easy to forget that you couldn't really see you rarely got to see the black and white, Raymond Burr version, but then you almost, like, it was really, really hard until recently, or fairly recently, to see the original uncut. And so, most of us grew up with that. But in general, like, this started lots of stuff. I mean, and it, the genesis was, the director was going to do another movie in the Philippines. That didn't happen, and he heard about, these sailors who actually got irradiated and, died.
Yeah, that was Tomoyuki Tanaka. He was the producer of the original film, and that whole thing fell through. And he was also greatly inspired by the release of The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms and the re-release. And it was kind of a stroke of genius, like you were saying, that he kind of integrated the idea, this potentially very profitable idea of a monster movie with something that could have very real modern ramifications.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's another, like, it's weird because we don't think of it now, but at the time, it was a rip from the headlines kind of thing, like what we would see on CAI, like some kind of law show or a cop show, And you integrate that into a monster movie.
Go ahead, sorry. I like this better. We did The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. I don't know how many episodes back now, but we did it. I like this movie and I love Ray Harryhausen, don't get me wrong. Yeah, but sure. I love this movie so much more than Beast from 20,000 Fathoms because it has that topical, and again, we're talking about a monster movie, but it has a kind of grittiness to it, and a sadness to it, and I don't think you could have gotten that out of an American movie at that time. America, pre 9/11 America, you could probably get something more similar in tone to this. But the fact that this is so close to World War II and there is that sort of atomic, atomic specter looming over the whole thing, it just lends this quality to it.
Yeah, sure. It's funny you should bring up, like we were talking about Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, Shigeru Koyama, his original screenplay, his original story for the film actually did hedge quite a bit closer to The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, almost to the point where it was almost a remake, because there was a scene with a lighthouse where Godzilla comes ashore at night, and there's a few other sequences like that. Eventually stuff that was trimmed, but yeah, that atomic metaphor was always there, because I think Tanaka, the producer, provided the germ of the idea, but then it was Ishiro Honda who really kind of took it and ran with it, because he was the director here. He served in the war twice. He was a POW during the Chinese occupation. He was a foot soldier. He was a commander at one point, and he was a pacifist, though. He and most of the people working on these films, they hated the war, and when they came home, it had a huge, profound effect on them. And he went and toured Hiroshima after the bombing, and that all really affected him. So you really believe it when he says, a lot of days nowadays, you hear people talking about film and how they wanted to say something with the film, or they wanted to bring across a certain message, and sometimes that message gets lost, or you feel like it's just marketing. It's like, oh, you got to say this, or you got to say this. But when it comes to Honda, you really feel that everything he was doing was genuine,
right.
That it came from a place of really kind of a cry for peace, and it echoes throughout a lot of the other Godzilla movies.
Also, looking at the featurettes that are on the Blu-ray, they said that since the bombings were so censored by the occupation army, that some of the people, this was actually, even though they were in country, this was actually their first impression of, holy crap, this is the destruction that it could have been.
Wow,
they
really?
weren't allowed, in the news, they didn't show the terrible tragedy.
Wow.
If you weren't around there, you may not, of course you knew about it, but you didn't know the extent of it possibly. And I thought that was really interesting. It's stuff we never think of, because of course, we don't like to think, especially that we did that, regardless. In retrospect, thinking about how many lives were destroyed.
So we didn't even warn. There wasn't even, because there had been in other attacks, there had been warnings where they would send out flyers saying, there's going to be bombs dropped here. They didn't even warn anyone. They just dropped them.
Well, on our side, we say, and maybe, we have history. We can kind of think about it more. At the time, that was felt like that was the only way, because invading Japan was going to be extremely costly,
right?
In every way. But either way, this film was, it was a reaction to that. I think, and in general, even at the end, they're like, hey, I don't think this is the last, we'll see of this if we don't really watch what we're doing. And also in context, for Japanese audiences, and we don't ever think, I never really thought about it until I was an adult and watching, the uncut version and also, commentary and interviews was, it wasn't that long ago that for the audience of this time, those air raid sirens were something they had just experienced. There's a line in there where a woman goes, not this, or I can't remember who it was, but they go, not this again, and it's true, a lot of, what you had experienced only, 10 years before, if that, was echoed. I can only imagine what that must be like in the theater. That's a...
Oh, no. There was actually something in the IMDb trivia. It says that that at the point when some of the people were actually watching it in the theater that's attacked in the movie, or what's it called? I guess it's let's see, I don't remember, but anyway, and they actually thought, seeing it, that they were really being attacked. So they actually, there were some people who actually left, ran off screen.
Sure. Oh my gosh, that's some Orson Welles.
I know, totally Orson Welles.
Yeah, and as an audience, it's hard for us to really fathom that because we've seen so much kind of goofy Godzilla or spectacle Godzilla.
Yeah.
And so I urge people, a lot of people I think may skip this thinking that it's kind of similar. Like, your average horror movie person or even if you like giant monster movies, you may not go back to the uncut black and white one and go, oh, I'm going to do this, because it's a very character-based film as well. But if you're thinking about these things, it is even more impactful. You're seeing the birth of a lot of things there.
Definitely. There is definitely, talking about the realism of the film, there's something I really wanted to point out. You talk about a lot of the realism of the film, the very documentarian style the film was made in, and it reminded me of what my favorite scene. This is Matt, by the way. This reminds me of what my favorite scenes are in the movie, and it doesn't. I mean, I love all the stuff with Godzilla. I love all the stuff with the characters. I love all that great stuff. But the scenes that really kind of feel the most real to me, that feel just so pitch perfect, are two separate scenes, and they both take place in the Japanese Parliament. And it's you would think that these are the most boring scenes. This is how you know that I'm getting older, is because this is the stuff that fascinates me now. Because it's a scene where the first time they do it, they have the survivor, because in the movie Godzilla hasn't been shown yet, but he destroys the village or part of the village on Odo Island, which is a little tiny island off the coast of Japan, and that's where the legend of Gojira comes from. And they are brought to the Japanese Parliament, and it's a series of shots of the survivors from the island, kind of just talking about what happened. And they'll have these little touches, like one guy will get up and he'll just say, like, well, we lost 17 pigs, 25 chickens. And you get the impression that it's just he's just trying to get some compensation for his island. Like, it's so mundane, and yet it adds that little extra layer of realism to it. And then in addition to that, later, after Dr. Yamane, played by the legendary Takashi Shimura, is talking about Godzilla, he's like, well, I saw Godzilla, and this, it's about to hit the fan, shit's about to be real, yo. And I can just imagine him getting up and saying that. And he is talking about how he discovered strontium-90 in Godzilla's footprints, and you can see everybody in the room get visibly uncomfortable.
Oh yeah.
And because he starts talking about the bomb, and you can see everybody's kind of whispering to each other. And then thus begins one of the best parts, which is where this blustering, patriarchal, clearly right-wing politician stands up and starts, talking about how, this is something that with this whole nuclear bomb, this whole nuclear irradiated thing, he's so focused on that, he's telling that everybody needs to keep this quiet. And he's not directly saying it, but he is implying that, we've already got really tense. We've got a lot of tension with America right now, and with Russia and all these other countries who have nukes. We don't want to stir the pot here. And then, in a very bold move for a Japanese film of this time, there's a woman who you get the impression is part of some, she's not necessarily a politician, but maybe the leader of some political party or something. And she stands up and starts saying, no, we need to find who's responsible for this, and we need to let the people know. And it just kind of erupts into this huge argument. Cut to Dr. Yamane, who just kind of sinks in his chair because it's like a bedraggled parent watching his children argue.
Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful, beautiful filmmaking. I'm sorry for going on for so long.
This is exactly how it is on a normal week.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
And by the
let me
way,
ask you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
To people out there, I thought I knew a lot about Godzilla, and then I met Matt. And so he's forgotten more about Godzilla than I even knew. So this is really a treat for everyone
when there was to know.
on the podcast.
Well, let me ask you this, guys. So Tony already started talking a little bit earlier about how this is the first giant monster. There's not really a concept of giant monsters, or at least one of the first. So
Right.
Talk a little bit more about that in terms of compare Godzilla with other giant monsters, and what do you think as far as like the importance of it, and how does Godzilla hold up with the? I mean, I'm thinking he holds up pretty well, but how does Godzilla hold up against other giant monsters? Whoever wants.
Well, one thing I liked also, and they mention it in in the supplements, is they talk a lot about how he has this slow kind of walk, and they also compare it to like sumo. There's a term for like a sumo walk, and how chilling that is. That it's gonna get you. Like, this thing is a force of nature, and it's slow and coming. And I always, a lot of people say it's more like a hurricane. Godzilla in this is more like a hurricane. You can't really get rid of a Godzilla. You can try to dissuade a Godzilla. You can evacuate, but it's coming, and it's terrifying in that sense. And I think it's important that it's different than like Beast of 20,000 Fathoms, which kind of like rampages and stuff. It's a different feel, or even like Them, or a lot of movies like that, which had there were of course there was King Kong, but there wasn't. This is the genesis of a new kind of monster movie, and certainly in Japan, the actual like kaiju genre comes from this, where there were other giant monsters, like I said, of course, King Kong, etc. But this is really a different thing altogether, and I don't know. It just feels different. We talked a lot about the documentary quality of it, and I think that along and devolves rapidly as after like about the third movie, it's kind of like Godzilla's taken on a kind of different feel.
Oh, he's so cute after a while. But this first one, like he starts out being, and I mean we were going to talk about kind of the evolution of Godzilla a little bit later, but yeah, in this particular film, I agree that he does feel so threatening. He's not cute at all. He's just like really scary, and eventually he kind of gets to be this cute little puppet. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No. I was just going to concur that he kind of feels like anger personified. And that's really kind of. It's like he's angry about everything that's happened. And it's kind of like it's got all this pent-up rage based in addition to everything that happened in World War II, everything happened at the end of World War II, and now all this international turmoil post-World War II. And it's just kind of, it's like he's kind of sick of our crap, and it's just kind of cutting loose. But anyway.
Well, they refer to it as a resurrection at one point, and as well as talking about we destroyed his lair. So there's a very real, all this terrible thing is, all these terrible things are happening, and there's also the very real thing of, maybe it wasn't Japan, but somebody, the U.S. in this case, did this. Like, people did this. This comes against us because we did this. And there's a very fatalistic thing. And I've even seen, stuff about Japan itself, which has always had, volcanoes, earthquakes, etc. And so when it's part of a culture where destruction can happen, there's also, I think in the West, we may never get, especially from that time period, we may never get it. Also, going back to, Kurosawa, when they come and they're like, hey, we heard this about Germans. He's extremely quick post-occupation to say, I don't know any Germans. And at the time, like for us, if you don't think about it, it's kind of a line. But then you're like, oh yeah, well, I mean, that's a very real, very terrible thing. If he admitted that that would be war crimes.
You almost kind of get the feeling that he wasn't like trying to cover anything up. He was just, it was almost like a knee-jerk reaction because nobody wanted to be associated with it. And even if he didn't, and he was probably sick of people accusing him of that, because he was in the war, he was wounded in the war, that's why he lost his eye, and stuff like that there.
But either way, it's a very serious implication. Yeah, no, I mean, that's why we're here. So, but yeah, that line itself. I mean, there's so much stuff where when you really, take a, high view of it, you're like, wow, this has so much more than just like kind of eventually where Godzilla's dancing, which I love. But it's a totally different thing. I've even had a friend who said, when Godzilla appears over the hill, like he still gets chills, And I agree. Like, I think it's something there, and you kind of, I think for a lot of people, you either get it or you don't. But I think that's part of why we're here, right? Like, you listen to this and you might go, wow, I should check that out because I never thought about it that way. So.
Well, go ahead, Drew. Yeah. Was it Drew or Matt?
That's
true.
I really have to say, like, I love practical effects, and this movie, we want to talk about comparing it to everything that came before it and everything that has come after it. This created an entire genre of Japanese monster movies where the emphasis was on miniatures and these highly detailed suits. And I remember very distinctly, when my brother and I would ride up to the public library and we would read these big books they had on monsters, and they had one on Godzilla. I remember the librarian once going on, "Oh, those movies look so fake." And they don't look fake to me. This does not look fake to me. Yes, there's stuff that I know is not real, but it doesn't feel fake because it's something that's actually there. Like somebody made it. There's a detail.
Yeah, it's not. Well,
it.
yeah. I mean, compared with the new Spider-Man, which I have not seen the new. I don't even know if it's out yet. The Spider-Man 2, is it out yet?
I saw it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's out yet.
I have not seen it, but from the commercials, it just looks like animation. It looks like when Spider-Man's and whereas this feels he feels big, he feels heavy. The only time it feels fake to me is when, like I said, he's tossing around the little cars and they just look like toys. I mean, the toys.
But even that's something that actually exists in reality.
Yeah, but it still seems small. Whereas when he is dealing with the electrical wires and the big towers, and then he's melting them. I mean, I think they made him out of wax so that they could actually be melted with the hot lights of the theater, of the studio. I mean, that's crazy realistic looking. That looked awesome to me. I didn't feel like that was fake at all.
Yeah, I feel like the ones that they they continued to to do it in these style, and they got better and better and better at doing these style movies. Like the ones that they were doing up in the 90s, like those have great effects to me. And this is the genesis of that. This created, there had been giant monster movies, there had been King Kong and things like that, but this really created its own, the Asian version of that, which is its own thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to. It feels like we're dangling really closely to the topic of the evolution of Godzilla.
Okay, well, go ahead. Go for it.
But it's such a fun track to kind of dig in. I mean, because there are a lot of stuff up to that point. Giant monsters had merely been monsters, had merely been animals, and something for people to vanquish. And that's a very American attitude. The idea of kind of conquering the wilderness and asserting your it's kind of like with the original King Kong when you get the film really kind of takes for granted that the audience is going to be sympathetic with Kong, and yet they still kill him in the end. And part of that, you get the impression that it couldn't really have ended any other way because it was almost as though Kong. It was like as though man had proclaimed that Kong had transgressed by just existing, and that he needed to die. And it's almost like that's just, you kind of get the impression of if the film were a person and you were to ask it why it made that decision, the film would just say, well, that's just the way it is, right?
Yeah.
And we don't allow certain people on golf courses also, like it just there's no logic to it other than, I mean, it's the way it's supposed to. I mean, granted, there is a logic that it is a tragic film and it wouldn't be nearly as poignant if he had lived. But Godzilla is kind of the same way because it is such a tragic. The first film is such a tragic creature, such a tragic monster, in a way that, like I said, he is rage personified. He's angry because of everything that's been happening, and he, you don't necessarily feel bad that he dies. I mean, you might, but you feel as though it is sad that he dies. It's spoilers, Godzilla dies at the end of the original. The 60-year-old film, well, 59 and a half. But it's funny you also bring up the whole, like I said, the evolution of Godzilla moving forward and how things start becoming. Yet when I watch a lot of even the later films that do get really goofy, where he's jumping for joy in Monster Zero, or he's throwing rocks or whatever, teaming up with other monsters, particularly if the film is directed by Yoshiro Honda, he still kind of carries some of his themes that are important to him into these other films. Like there's usually the concept of the Brotherhood of Man, like in Godzilla, in Mothra versus Godzilla. They go to Infant Island to go. The human characters go to Infant Island to go plead with Mothra to come and fight Godzilla, and the natives refuse because, and they say that your people have played with the fire of the gods, and our people are stricken with disease. And the implication is that the people of Infant Island, the people who worship Mothra, have been basically, they were bombed. Like they were victims of atomic testing in the 50s and even into the 60s. And the interesting thing is that Yoshiro Honda makes no distinction between the Japanese and the Americans. He pretty much says that this is everyone's responsibility. And it's just a nice little moment that kind of gives you pause.
It's funny you talk about the evolution of Godzilla and how you don't really feel as bad. I mean, we're trying to stop a horrific thing happening. However, in '85, we kill him again, and I go, no. For some reason, like dropping Godzilla in a volcano, like I was really like, man, it didn't feel good.
I cried
in this
like
one every time. Yeah, exactly.
I was going to say, I cried like a baby. I bawled for half an hour when I saw that when I was a little kid. And it's partially
was that one of the cute? Is that because that was one of the cute Godzillas?
No,
he was a terrifying force of destruction.
Oh.
Yeah.
But he just
85 is like they basically go. Do they even acknowledge the second one, which is also kind of more serious?
They just went back to the original and said, like, well, there hasn't been a Godzilla for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
Now he's back, and he's back, and he's pissed off. He's here to eat our radiation stores, and but it's that ending though, because they do kind of spin the film. The Professor Hayashida character spends the film basically telling us that Godzilla is ultimately a tragic character, and when he gets cast into the volcano at the end of the film, they have that mournful music playing, and he has that screeching cry, that the highest pitched cry he's ever had when he falls into the volcano. And you're just like, no, it's not his fault.
Aww.
Yeah. I have to agree.
You do root for Godzilla. I mean, you probably do less so here because they have like the big close-ups of like crying people who are part of the destruction.
We do have, though, thankfully, a character who is saying, couldn't there be another way to deal with this rather than kill him? Mm-hmm. And I think that is, so it does give you a little bit of empathy where it's like, there's got to be a different way that we could, and I mean, in his case, he's wanting to study. He's like, can't we study him, and can't we do, but I mean, there's really
he has a very rational reason. He has a very rational reason for wanting to study him. It's like, how did this creature survive being nuked?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, thank you. That's an excellent point. It's something that the American version doesn't really touch on because it kind of starts trimming out the nuclear metaphor. But that's an excellent point.
Yeah,
and it's pretty amazing. And also, it goes. They run the gamut of like, one guy wants to study it, and he has different reasons. And then even the scientist has this terrible doomsday device, and he's like, he's basically like, what am I doing? Like, I unleashed the doomsday device. Like, he actually ends up killing himself because he's afraid more people will make oxygen destroyers. And will oxygen destroyer be the new thing that people use? Like,
I love the name.
He sees
this
thing is like, this is a terrible.
Destroyer.
Yeah, that would be good.
We actually, it's funny you should say that because I've been working on a comic for a couple of years where we do have a band called the Hydrogen Destroyers. But
hey,
there you go.
Nobody take that. Nobody take it. We're using it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You heard it here. Matt has it already. So if you steal it, you're just a bastard person. Yeah, you're just a jerk. But yeah, man, like it's there's all of that he's really, he's thought about this. There's a reason. He's not just like, I'm a scientist, I don't want to give you that. He sees the ramifications and doesn't want to unleash, in his mind, unleashing this is just as bad as another Godzilla. And, that's a valid point. It's really complicated. For, we see, like, it's way more complicated than, for example, like we keep mentioning Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which, by the way, I still say I would not be mad at the 98 Godzilla if it had just been Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, the remake, which would have been made sense. Like, if they said, it's not Godzilla, we're remaking Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, I actually think that could have worked.
Well, then
but as a Godzilla film, I really hate that film. So.
Well, then, A, nobody would have gone to see it, and B, everybody would have, that there would have been people who would have been like, well, that really kind of, that was just a Godzilla movie, wasn't it?
Right. Yeah, but it would have worked as that. Like, all of it, it's at New York. Like, all of it, like, I wouldn't have felt bad. As a Godzilla movie, though, man, oh, man, that's a bad. But,
you remake Godzilla and don't put Godzilla in the movie, you're going to have a bad time.
Exactly.
Hey, I'd like to ask Drew. Drew, what is you had mentioned that you wanted to talk a little bit about the Toho-verse, and by the way, that is the name of the theater. Also, it's the Toho Theater. So, tell us a little bit about the Toho-verse, the universe that this movie is made in.
Well, when we talk about the Universal monsters, which we've done so many of those now. We talk about how that was kind of the genesis of something that's a lot more commonplace now, which is this concept of a shared universe. Which now you look at all the Marvel movies, you look at what they're trying to do with Man of Steel sequel, all the decades worth of comic books and things like that, and it's become so much more commonplace. But back when this movie was made, they weren't thinking about it, but they were really starting this whole world of characters, because after Godzilla, we got Mothra and Rodan and King Ghidorah, and they all started interacting with each other, and you would have these movies where they teamed up, and you have this fictional universe, this fictional world, which is very rich and very vast and full of all these interesting monster characters that are, have their own little personality. Most of these monsters that come from these Japanese movies have fully developed personalities and backstories and even different versions of the same character. And it's fascinating. And it's one of the things I find most fascinating about these particular kinds of monster movies versus American giant monster movies, because you don't really see that. You do see it with, like, the Gothic characters like Frankenstein and Wolfman and Dracula, but you don't, they imported King Kong to put him in a Godzilla movie, but you've never seen, like, King Kong in a movie with the Cyclops from Seventh Voyage of Sinbad or something like that.
I'd watch the hell out of that.
I would too, but for some reason there's something very, I guess, I call it the Toho-verse. I don't know if anybody else does. I'm sure I probably do.
Yeah, that's pretty much the whole Godzilla fandom pretty much follows you in that. It's like, it is kind of generally referred to as the Toho-verse. And it's funny because we had such a rich tapestry of films in between the original Godzilla and leading up to, like, King Kong versus Godzilla and Mothra versus Godzilla, which are pretty early in the cycle. There were all of these other movies because they were just like, man, people really like these monster movies. Let's keep making them. Let's make a bunch of really cool ones with, like, crazy characters and aliens and robots and all kinds of different monsters. And yeah, so you're right. And then it kind of folded into itself at one point and became, oh, hey, yes, all these movies happen in the same universe. Mm-hmm. You're in the Toho-verse when you're making a Frankenstein movie, Frankenstein Conquers the World, and then a giant dinosaur shows up for no reason other than it's Japan and this just happens.
Exactly.
I really love that Frankenstein movie, by the way. But my favorite Godzilla movie is probably Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, because it's like the Justice League. It's like the Justice League of monsters. It's like they bring in Ghidorah, who is like the baddest, you know, he's like the planetary assassin. You know, like he's there to wipe humanity out, and then Mothra, Rodan, and Godzilla team up to kick his ass. And I love that because, you know, as a kid, you're a kid, you know, you're reading, you know, Marvel comics and DC comics, and, you know, you're seeing your superheroes team up, but you like monsters. Like, if you're like me, you like superheroes, but you like monsters a little bit more than you like superheroes. Seeing like essentially a superhero team of monsters is like the best thing ever.
Yeah, that's it's funny. I made an observation like a year or two ago on Facebook where I said, hey, you know what movie brought together a bunch of different franchises or brought together a bunch of different previously unconnected series way before the Avengers did? Destroy All Monsters. Which, you know,
I remember. I remember watching that with my stepbrothers, and we all loved that. And just when you got that, it was like a Marvel team up, because you were also reading Marvel team up. So when you're like, this is in my comics, and now all my favorite monsters get together, like it can't. It's hard to get better than that. Like that was just mind blowing as a kid, especially. It's still fun as hell, but at the time was just, you could not believe this was happening. Like all of them. Whoa. That was just.
I hope they try to recreate that with the new one that they. I mean, I know they've come up with a new monster from the side, but I really would love to see new versions of Rodan and, you know, GOJIRA, you know, like.
Well, before we get too much off into all the other movies that we could possibly talk about, let's get back to this one. And I want to hear a little bit more about the actual people that are in the movie and like the plot of the film, because we've talked a lot about the monster, but we haven't really talked actually about the guy in the monster suit, because he had. Poor guy. I mean, he was like, apparently he was passing out. They were like draining sweat out of him.
Haruo Nakajima, the man of 100 monsters. You think, you know, Lon Chaney Jr., you know, he was our guy over here on this side of the pond. Haruo Nakajima was the guy who was getting stuffed into just about anything that required 150 pounds of latex and getting shot at with Roman candles.
Oh, by the way, I was super jealous. I saw on Facebook where, like, Harry Knowles was talking about they had a latex Godzilla suit, and how he asked his dad how much it cost, and at the time, it was like the 70s, like, oh, I got that for like $50, and I'm like, if I could get a suit for $50, I would just wear that. I would just like walk. I would go to like the bus stop and just sit down and get on the bus and just ride it around with the newspaper.
You'd be like that clown guy on Staten Island, just show up places.
Yeah, except how much cooler would it be, because I'd be Godzilla.
I don't know.
That would just be awesome.
You probably wouldn't last very long, because I've got a friend who made his own Godzilla suit. My friend Billy made his own Godzilla suit from just, you know, latex and foam, and it had a kind of a bit of a support structure in it. And he could really only he's a big dude, and he used to be a wrestler, so he actually like had a lot of stamina, so he could wear the suit for long periods of time. But that thing practically destroyed him. I mean,
especially in Texas, Tony.
Well, one weekend we were at Dragon Con in Atlanta. This was not where Tony and I have both been to, but this was not this previous year, the year before that. He would wear the thing around, and he didn't properly pad the backs of his legs. So his legs were so badly chafed that he had to basically like go to we had to go get him like some kind of a like a lotion or something the night before he left, and he had to go to the doctor when he got back home. And that'll mess you up, man.
Mess you up. So talk about the other people, the actual humans that are in the movie. Does anybody want to give a shot at the plot? The basic plot that the people have going on in the background?
Matt, we have you on here as a special guest, so if you don't mind, that would be cool.
All right. Hang on. So basically, the film more or less is how. Hold on, I gotta think about exactly where to start this. Okay, so basically, ships, specifically Japanese fishing boats, and several different kinds of boats out in the Pacific, not too far off Japan, started disappearing. You know, they describe it as a blinding flash of light, and then the ocean bursts into flames. That's specifically from the American dub, but I like that line. And so, of course, you know, this is starting to cause panic, and the Japanese Navy is and the maritime defense and are really, you know, kind of feeling pressure from this publicly to kind of deal with what's going on. And eventually, survivors start washing ashore on Odo Island, and the people of Odo Island, they think that it's Gojira, a god that supposedly lives off the coast of the island. And you know, they used to send young maidens out on rafts to sacrifice to the great god Gojira, but you know, that's more of a kind of a throwaway line in the movie. Anyway, eventually the goings on the island, which at one point the island is actually leveled during a storm, and the damage is not consistent with that of a hurricane. This attracts the attention of Dr. Yamane, as I mentioned before, played by Takashi Shimura from Seven Samurai. He then leads an expedition to the island to kind of go figure out what's going on. He's a paleontologist, and he thinks that it might be, you know, he's got an inkling, there might be something. He along with his daughter, Emiko, and her would-be lover, Ogata, a young naval officer, they all run afoul of this giant reptilian creature who's just been, you know, tearing the place up and disappears into the sea. Yamane then advises that they should try to track this thing down, but generally probably should just study it because, you know, this thing has clearly been awoken by atomic bombs. And the government says, no, we're just going to start hitting it with depth charges. That'll solve everything, right? You know, this thing clearly survived a nuclear explosion. So, we'll just hit it with a couple of bombs. That'll do it. And, of course, it absolutely does not piss this thing off beyond reason, and then it totally doesn't level Tokyo. So, and, of course, you know, it all comes full circle when we meet Dr. Serizawa, played by Akihiko Hirata, I believe is his name. He is a scientist who is connected to this because he is Emiko's, what's the word I'm looking for? They have an arranged marriage from when they were young.
Right.
Yeah. And then that's how he's connected to all of this. He had stumbled onto a compound that could basically make water into an incredibly deadly dissolving compound, basically change the chemical compound of water itself. And he was so bereft of guilt, not bereft, he was so racked with guilt and just it was weighing so heavily on his soul that he shared this knowledge with Emiko, who then, after Godzilla attacks, decides, you know what, that thing that he showed me, that's probably the only thing that could stop Godzilla. Heretofore, we have the big, horrible decision that needs to be made by the end of the film, which is, do we unleash the oxygen destroyer and just potentially kill Godzilla and possibly unleash an even worse monster in the world, or do we just sit around and just wait for Godzilla to show up again? Because clearly nothing else we're doing is going to stop this thing. And I'm done. I'll be here all week.
Well, and meanwhile, there's this lovely little love story going on in the background, which cracks me up, between Emiko and her current boyfriend, Ogata, and he's like, she wants to marry him, and so she's going to she's broken off her arranged engagement with Serizawa, and she's going to marry Ogata. But so all this is going on, this Godzilla stuff's going on, and he's like, I'm going to ask your dad if I can marry for his blessing.
What?
So that cracks me up because, you know, the poor guy, Dr. Yamane, is out there going, you know, I want him kept alive, and he's just like, the actor is such a great actor, and he's so defeated by everything that's going on. And this guy's over here going, okay, I'm going to ask him now. You guys ask him now. And the guy's like, don't ever talk to me again because you want Godzilla dead, just like the rest of them. Leave. Don't ever come back here. He's like, oh man, maybe it's not a good time to ask him.
You know what I think is awesome about this though is it's still like all of that exists in the movie, and I've seen horror movies where they try to introduce like a human element, and it all seems really like, just give me the monster. I don't get that impression with this, like, because this kind of thing is what's going on. Like, human beings aren't really well equipped to deal with stress like this. And so a lot of people's coping mechanism is just like, I have a thing that I'm going to do. Yeah. I'm gonna like concentrate on that. I
really love all this.
I like all of the. I think they're very fully realized characters. I mean, because they also bring it back. Like, one of the reasons like he can't get this blessing is because there's such a thing as Godzilla. Normally, it would be a different thing where he'd be like, I don't know if you're good enough for my daughter. Now he's got to contend with like, you want the monster dead. What do you do with that? Like, I didn't anticipate this monster being part of our, and when she goes back, like, there's still, they grew up together. There's still a thing, and she feels kind of bad, like, am I really just kind of using him to get this thing? Like, how do I reconcile that? Like, all the human bits like that really ring true, not just in the we talked about the war era stuff, but just in their. People could make a drama just on that. I don't know what we'd replace what the dad disapproves of besides Godzilla, but you could make a drama just out of that kernel of a movie. And yet it's also this monster movie, and it also rings true,
Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, we actually are winding up here at the hour, so I'd like to get everybody's kind of last thoughts, anything else you wanted to say, didn't get a chance to say. And let me actually start with Drew, since we haven't heard from you in a little bit.
Well, I wanted to say that I really love all the love triangle stuff because it feels almost like a war movie. Like this crazy thing is going on, and yet your real life is still plugging along too. And that is, in closing, tying that into my closing thoughts, that is what makes this movie special, is that they do manage to tie in that human element to this in a big way, in a way most other movies of this, any, monster movie, American, Japanese, whatever, like this movie really has that going for it, and it's just, it's such a pleasure to watch.
Right. Well, Matt, you want to tell us your closing thoughts? Anything else you want to say about the movie before we move on to our endorsements?
Well, I clearly haven't yacked my head off enough, so
that's why you're here.
Well, there's not much more to say. There's been a lot of ink spilled over this movie, especially in recent years, and especially with the new movie coming out. But I do think that it is one of those things that does kind of take people by surprise, that this film, this 60-some-odd-year-old film, is really still has a lot of poignancy to it. And I do remember seeing it when I saw it in the screening at South by Southwest. I was seeing it with an audience, definitely a mix of Godzilla fans and folks who are just curious, because the new movie really is, I think, getting a lot of people into Godzilla, and it kind of showing people like, oh, maybe there's something to this, because the original and I remember watching the original film, and there are some moments where you're kind of like, this movie's pretty rough around the edges. There's a lot of, it's more from a technical perspective. There's some awkward jump cuts. The soundtrack is pretty primitive, which is, again, it's just part of the time and everything. But it all ultimately kind of adds to it, and you really get the impression that this is a film that is firmly the product of its time and the product of its creation. It's like Jaws, You could never recreate Jaws because it's so firmly a product of the production itself and the times in which it was created in. And the same goes for Godzilla. For Gojira, that lightning was caught in the bottle only that one time. It only works in that context, which is why I'm glad they didn't really try to revisit that directly or try to remake the original film. They took it in new and different and fun directions, and that's fine. And I'm glad that we still are revisiting that, and we still are and the new movie is kind of touching on that. I just think that the original just kind of exists in a class on its own, and I think I'm glad that so many people respect it for that now.
Now, you haven't gotten to see an advanced screening, have you, of the new one, or have you?
No, not yet.
Okay.
But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful.
Yeah. Okay, we'll be talking about that one as soon as it comes out. Tony, what do you have last thoughts about the movie?
My final thoughts too. I think one thing we didn't touch on is the score, which is some of the most iconic.
So
like, if you aren't a big fan but you've heard it, it sticks with you. And if you're a big fan, anytime that comes on, no matter what, that is a moment. And it, the score is just unbelievable. It fits. It's poignant, and it just has become such an iconic thing. You'll see it. Sometimes you'll have it in commercials. It's its own thing, and I think people should seek out. I got a really great 2-disc set that had like a good retrospective. I think Rhino or somebody did a while back. I think that's probably out of print, but it's unbelievable. Also, I would recommend checking out. There's a featurette on the Blu-ray that's about just the matte paintings, and I didn't even know that. And I look for that stuff, and holy cow, some of the best. Like, I don't think I've seen a better matte painting, kind of like showing you the craft of it and what you don't notice until I'd seen The Thing. There's a documentary about The Thing that's on the DVD, and and we're kind of losing that with the way that we do digital matte painting, but it's so fantastic. They turned there were areas where I could have sworn they just filmed it on the beach. Nope, that was a matte painting, and it was done really well. So all the, when people talk about, well, the monster kind of doesn't look quite right here or whatever, there's so much craft going on that you don't even know about in this film that I have immense respect for. Again, practical effects. Somebody painted that and it looked that freaking realistic, and just amazing stuff. It's hands down. And I really do urge people to, if you can, seek out the uncut version. If you aren't even hardcore enough to watch both, I understand, but and think about these things in context, and I think you'll come away with a lot different impression than you might have if you just like, oh, it's that black and white thing,
Cool. Thank you so much. Well, I'm going to start off as far as my closing thoughts, I think I already said everything I would say, which is just, it's a real delight, and I'm glad that we watched it, that I can cross it off of my list of classics that I hadn't seen, and now I've seen it. And now I'm actually going to start off the endorsements myself, because the coolest thing happened. I know I mentioned this on Facebook to Tony and Jason. My child is in middle school, and she chose for her research project that she had to do, she chose manga and anime, and her teacher was like, well, I don't know if you're going to be able to find books on that, really. And she's like, but she had already, Jason and her, she had already gone to the library, and they had found a bunch of books, so she was set, right? So she comes home the other day and says, oh, hey, Dad, one of your books is mentioned in this manga and anime book, research book that I have, and she just mentions it like offhand, like it's just the most normal thing in the whole world. But oh my God, how cool is that? It's called Understanding Manga and Anime, so that's my endorsement for the week, by Robin Brenner. Thank you, Robin Brenner. And it mentions Tony and Jason's SciComm book, and
nice.
It talks about it's just like talking about art and like how, English language manga, introducing Japanese concept, whatever. But it was the coolest thing ever. So I just wanted to do a shout out to Robin Brenner and thank you for the mention.
Although Mr. Brenner could have mentioned me, actually.
Huh? It doesn't mention you, but I mentioned your book,
Mr. Brenner.
It does mention your book, so. Anyways, I apologize, Tony, that your name is not in it, but your book is mentioned, so that's cool.
That's okay.
Anyway, so that's great, and who wants to go next? I don't know, Matt. Do you want to tell us whatever your endorsements, what you're working on, what you've been working on?
Yes. Sure, I can do that real quick. I mean, like we talked about at the beginning, I'm working on the current Godzilla comic book series from IDW, which is Godzilla Rulers of Earth. I'm the lead artist on that. Occasionally, I do most of the issues. Occasionally, there will be an issue by the very talented Jeff Zorno, who also is a huge Godzilla fan. And really, the book is just made up of Godzilla fans. Our writer, Chris Mowry, is a huge Godzilla fan as well. And we are just having a lot of fun with it. So, yeah, I mean, go check it out. It's in comic book stores. Volume 2 just recently came out. We're plowing through Volume 3. I'm working on issue 14 right now. And, that's the thing to keep an eye open for. I've been working on Colossal Kaiju Combat, which is an upcoming game. Just Google Colossal Kaiju Combat, and you should be able to find some info about it. Not out quite yet, but, we're working on it. As far as outside endorsements go, I know there was something. Oh, yeah. Keep an eye open because, what's recently been coming out have been a ton of Godzilla DVDs and a ton of Blu-rays especially. So if you got that Godzilla itch and you really want to get caught up, definitely just go to your local store or go to Amazon or whatever and just load up. They're all pretty inexpensive. One thing that I never thought I'd see on DVD is Godzilla the series, which was the animated series made to follow the 1998 movie that we all hate. And it is one of, and the American movie, everybody's, there's a lot of truth to it being, not a great interpretation of Godzilla. The animated series is one of my favorite interpretations of Godzilla because it's just so rock solid. It is great writing, great animation, has less a feel of classic kaiju movies and more a feel of 50s B American creature features, kind of has a bit more of that vibe to it. So, yeah, Godzilla series, go track that down because it's really a lot of fun. And it's all 40 episodes in the same set. So, yeah, treat yourself.
I like that. I like that cartoon quite a bit. In fact, I just watched the episode where Godzilla fights the Loch Ness Monster the other day.
Oh, I love that one.
Yeah.
Well, I need to see this. I was so I keep hearing that it's good. I mean, I was so burned by the Hollywood movie that I was like, a cartoon? This can't be good. But the more it's come out, the more I hear about it, the more I'm like, okay, I need to check this out.
Yeah, it's on Netflix, so you don't even have to hunt it
Double
down.
Awesome.
No,
yeah,
go buy it.
No, I know. I was also, one day I was hoping, since I'm unemployed right now, doing some freelance work, I look longingly at those Blu-rays because they're really good. And so I'm like, how do we get on the screener list for these Blu-rays?
Right, there you go.
Because I've been so Amazon, why do you tempt me? Especially Hedorah, which is kind of one of those that hasn't really had a good release that I remember. And I'm like, oh, man, Blu-ray of that. And the new King Kong movies that have come out on Blu-ray, the Japanese ones. I'm like, why now? Why am I unemployed now? Those are things, by the way.
What else do you have to endorse this week for us?
For me, I have Auguste Dragone's Ieiji Tsuburaya, Master of Monsters. A really great. It's just come out in softcover. It was previously hardcover. And Matt, we post links on the Facebook page. So later on, once the thing's posted, we post all the stuff so that people can go check it out. I have only made it. I got it the other day, and I've been super busy, tracking down jobs and stuff. but it is masterfully done. Great info, great pictures, just for any kaiju fan. And then if you listen to this episode, you're like, you know what, I want to find out more about, why these crazy guys wear suits and, about special effects in Japan during the time period. This book is just amazing. Just bang up job. Ragone has done. He talks everywhere. He's up there in the list of people who know their stuff when it comes to Godzilla and just monster movies, especially Ultraman, just the whole gamut of that. So I highly recommend that book. I had to get the soft cover because the hardcover was pretty expensive. And then my other endorsement, because it's kind of sort of horror, and I really enjoy this. If you've ever liked a Saw movie or just wanted to know what it feels like to be a villain, my cathartic video game is Deception 4 for the PS3, where demons, you are in league with Satan pretty much. They don't say that exactly, but the original did. The original did. It said Satan in big letters, and I was always like, wow, parents are going to love this game. But basically, you set traps. People come to a castle, there's different settings, and you set traps like gigantic slinging blade and, horse, torture horse thing that comes up from underneath, or flaming boulder. And you set these traps, and then you lead people into them by going, hey, I'm over here, and they run after you. And then, you springboard them into an Iron Maiden that dumps them into another trap, that then smashes them into a boulder. So, I feel kind of bad for liking these games because it is fairly horrific if you think about it. However, at the end of the day, when, things have been kind of crappy, it fills me full of glee to knock a person with a giant fan into a thing that then knocks them into a train that's powering through there and spits them out the top and then into, an electric chair. I don't know what that says about me, but it's very cathartic. You can pretend that's your boss, or it's a very good way to kind of get out all those feelings you have for things that you can't control by setting traps and doing terrible things. And some of the people are terrible, so maybe you can not feel bad for them. But that's Deception 4 for PS3, just because it's got, supernatural and, Saw-like insanity. It's like an adult mousetrap. So.
All right, cool. Drew, what do you got for us?
Well, I would not be doing myself a due if I did not make some personal plugs.
Go for it.
First off, as I've been saying for weeks, and as I will continue to say, Halloween Man, the series on Comixology. Go to the Monsterverse Comixology. We have stuff on there already. $1.99 gets you. Like you think you're getting a good dollar value reading your Marvel and your DC comics. They give you nothing. I give you everything. Like my average page count so far has been 70 pages for $1.99. Who does that? And this is your time to jump on the Halloween Man bandwagon. If there was a bandwagon anyway, I'm starting it right now. So go on Comixology. Go to the Monsterverse Comixology. And while I'm at it, you should check out while you were at it, you should check out some of the other awesome Monsterverse comics. Bela Lugosi's Tales from the Grave, Flesh and Blood, if you are a Hammer fan, is just the perfect Hammer fan fiction. It's the best Hammer movie that was never made. You got to check it out. On the completely other personal note, next week, I am going to Miami with my wife's band Danger Cakes. They are going to be playing the Penn Festival, which is pin-up burlesque, rockabilly, surf rock, tattoo, custom culture, a huge festival. They're going to be playing with Lost Straitjackets, the Safaris, and the one and only plugged on Castle of Horror, Puddles the Clown. So if you're a listener that is in Miami, and I don't know if you're out there, but if you are, come check out Danger Cakes. You've heard us talk about Danger Cakes a gazillion times. They're playing all 3 days. You can find the festival schedule on their website. That's Penn Miami. Go check that out. You can meet me in person and argue about monster movies with me in person. Jamie's had her fair share of co-hosting. You can argue about monster movies with her in between sets.
What are the dates?
It is the 22nd, the 23rd, and the 24th, I believe, and I will post the link to that. On a non-personal note, though, I have been enjoying. I don't know who programs Netflix, but Netflix just put up a bunch of old Eddie Murphy movies, and I'm talking like the 80s vintage Eddie Murphy when Eddie Murphy was the man. And I don't know why. I have been, I watched Trading Places. I watched Coming to America. I watched Beverly Hills Cop. I just finished Eddie Murphy Raw before, over dinner. forget about how, the Disney Eddie Murphy that we've been living with for the past 20 years and go back to the glorious 1980s where he was foul and offensive and actually really funny. And that's all available for you to enjoy on Netflix right now.
Oh, Matt, by the way, are you going to be at Comic Palooza?
Yes, sir, I will be.
Awesome. Hey, so also to everybody, we will be at Comic Palooza while Drew is in Miami. Memorial Day weekend starting that Friday. This is a precursor to I think I'm going to do a Godzilla panel if I'm not mistaken. And so we're going to be at Comic Palooza in Houston. If you listen to the podcast and you're already going, search for us there. And we always like meeting you, so that'll be cool. Very
cool. Well, yeah. I'm so thankful, Matt, that you joined us. I know you're super busy this week because everybody wants you since you're the Godzilla man.
I do have another
so much for your
podcast to go do tomorrow night.
And thank you, of course, as always, Tony and Drew, for your insights.
Well, I don't think my insight is nearly as on this particular subject. I bow to Matt and I bow to Tony on this one.
All right, then. We bow to you. You are the god. Okay. Well,
Godzilla.
Wah.
Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it. Have a wonderful night, and we will be back next week to talk about the new Godzilla movie. Woohoo!
Yay!
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
All right.
See ya.
Night.